Hello, welcome to this first ASMR story time. This inaugural ASMR will be reading from the book Mountains Beyond Mountains by Tracy, which can be found, among other places, in the UMA library. So Mountains Beyond Mountains. If you're not familiar, it came out in 2003. It's written by an investigative journalist about a doctor and anthropologist, Dr. Paul Farmer, about his work fighting tuberculosis in Haiti, Russia, and Peru, and some of the struggles of health equality that he dealt with during that time. So as this inaugural ASMR, I'll just be reading from Chapter 1 of Mountains Beyond Mountains to give you a brief introduction to the story and a little ASMR mental refresh. So before we get into Chapter 1, the book does start with 2 epigraphs. I always like to read the epigraphs of books because it tends to set the vibe a little bit. Give you a little taste of the writing style and what the book is going to be about. So this one first begins with a Haitian proverb, which reads "De mon genou," which translates to "Beyond mountains, there are mountains," which is where the book gets its name. The second epigraph is from T.S. Eliot's Dry Savages and reads, "And right action is freedom, from past and future also. For most of us, this is the aim, never here to be realized, who are only undefeated, because we have gone on trying." As I said, today we'll just be reading from Chapter 1 as a little taste of the beautiful poetic writing style of Tracy Kidder and a brief introduction to Dr. Farmer. 6 years after the fact, Dr. Paul Edward Farmer reminded me we met because of a beheading, of all things. It was 2 weeks before Christmas 1994, in a market town in central plateau of Haiti, a patch of paved road called Moralibus. Near the center of town, there was a Haitian army outpost, a concrete wall enclosing a weedy parade field, a jail, and a mustard-colored barracks. I was sitting with an army of special forces. Captain named John Carroll. I was sitting with an Army Special Forces captain named John Carroll, building a second-story balcony. Evening was coming on, the town's best hour, when the air changed from hot to balmy, and the music from the radios and the rum shops and the horns of the tap-taps passing through town grew loud and bright, and the general filth and poverty began to be obscured. Open sewers and ragged clothing, the looks on the faces of malnourished children, and the extended hands of elderly beggars plaintively saying "grangu," which means hungry in Creole. I was in Haiti to report on American soldiers. 20,000 of them had been sent to reinstate the country's democratically elected government and to strip away power from the military junta and deposed it and ruled with great cruelty charge of keeping the peace among 150,000 Haitians, spread across about 1,000 square miles of rural Haiti. A seemingly impossible job, and yet, out here in the Central Plateau, political violence had all but ended. In the past month, there had only been one murder. Then again, it had been spectacularly grisly a few weeks back. Captain Carroll's men had fished the headless corpse of the assistant mayor's Morales out of the Erdabat River. He was one of the elected officials being restored to power. Suspicion of his murder had fallen on one of the junta's local functionaries, a rural sheriff named Narava Justice, a frightening figure to most in the region. Captain Carroll and his men had brought Justice in for questioning, but they hadn't found any physical evidence or witnesses, so they had released him. The captain was 29 years old, a devout Baptist from Alabama. I liked him. From what I'd seen, he and his men had been trying earnestly to make improvements in the peace of Haiti. But Washington, which had decreed that this mission would not include nation building, had given them virtually no tools for that job. On one occasion, the captain had ordered the U.S. Army medevac flight for a pregnant Haitian woman in distress, and his commanders had reprimanded him for his pains. Up on the balcony of the barracks now, Captain Carroll was fuming that is the latest frustration when someone, and there was in a mirror. Captain Carroll was fuming up on the balcony of the barracks now. Captain Carroll was fuming about his latest frustration when someone said there was an American out there at the gate who wanted to see him. There were 5 visitors, actually, 4 of them Haitians. They stood in the gathering shadows in front of the barracks when their American friend came forward. He told Captain Carroll that his name was Paul Farmer, and he was a doctor, and that he worked in a hospital here, some miles north of Marialpis. I remember thinking that Captain Carroll and Dr. Farmer made a mismatched pair, and that Farmer suffered in the comparison. The captain stood about 6'2", tanned and muscular. As usual, a wad of snuff enlarged his lower lip. Now and then, he turned his head aside and spat. Farmer was about the same age, but much more delicate looking. He had short black hair and a high waist and long thin arms, and his thin nose was almost to a point. Next to the shoulder, he looked skinny and pale, and for all that he struck me as bold, indeed downright cocky. He asked the captain if his team had any medical problems. The captain said they had seen some sick prisoners from the local hospital and had refused to treat. I ended up buying the medicine myself. Farmer flashed a smile. "You'll spend time in purgatory." Then he asked, "Who cut off the head of the assistant mayor?" I don't know for sure," said the captain. "It's very hard to live in Haiti and not know who cut off someone's head," said Farmer. A circuitous argument followed. Farmer made it plain he didn't like the American government's plan for fixing Haiti's economy. A plan would aid business interests, but do nothing, in his view, to relieve the suffering of the average Haitian. He clearly believed that the United States had helped to foster this coup, for one thing, by having trained a high official of the junta at the U.S. Army School of the Americas. 2 clear sides existed in Haiti, Farmer said: the forces of the repression and the Haitian poor, the vast majority. Farmer was on the side of the poor, but he said the captain. But, he told the captain, it seems fuzzy which side the American soldiers are on. Locally, part of the fuzziness came from the fact that the captain had released the hated Narava Justice. I sensed that Farmer knew Haiti far better than the captain, and that he was trying to impart some important information. The people in this region were losing confidence in the captain. Farmers seemed to be saying, and this was a serious matter, obviously, for a team of 9 soldiers trying to govern 150,000. But the warning wasn't entirely plain, and the captain got a little riled up at Farmer's denunciation of the School of the Americas. As for Narava Juntas, he said, look, that guy is a bad guy. What I do have him. Look, that guy is a bad guy. When I do have him in the evidence, I'll slam him. He slapped a fist into his hand. But I'm not going to do the level of these guys. I'm not going to stoop to the level of these guys and make summary arrests. Farmer replied, in effect, and it made no sense for the captain to apply principles of constitutional law in a country that at the moment had no functioning legal system. Justice was a menace and should be looked up. So they reached a strange impasse. The captain, who described himself as a redneck, arguing for due process, and Farmer, who clearly considered himself a champion of human rights, arguing for preventative detention. Eventually, the captain said, he'd be surprised how many decisions about what I can do here get made in Washington. And Farmer said, I understand you're constrained. Sorry if we're being harrowing. It had grown dark. The 2 men stood in the square of light from the open barracks door. They shook hands as the young doctor disappeared into the shadows. I heard him speaking Creole to his Haitian friends. I stayed with the soldiers for several weeks. I didn't think much about Farmer. In spite of his closing words, I didn't think he understood or cared to sympathize with the captain's problems. Then, by chance, I ran into him again on my way home on the plane to Miami. He was sitting in first class. He explained that to the flight attendants put him there because he often flew this route on the occasion dealt with medical emergencies on board. The attendants let me sit with him for a while. I had dozens of questions with him about Haiti, including about the assistant mayor's murder. The soldiers thought that voodoo beliefs conferred a special, weird terror on decapitation. Does cutting off the victim's head have some basis in the history of voodoo? I asked. It has some basis in the history of brutality, Farmer answered. He frowned, and then he touched my arm, as if to say that we all ask stupid questions sometimes. I found out more about him. For one thing, he didn't dislike soldiers. I grew up in a trailer park, and I know which economic class joins the American military. He told me, speaking of Captain Carroll, you meet these 29-year-old soldiers, and you realize, come on, they're not the only ones making the bad policies. Come on, they're not the ones making the bad policies. He confirmed my impression, and he visited the captain to warn him. Many of Farmer's patients and Haitian friends had complained about the release of Narava Justice, saying it proved the Americans didn't really come to help them. Farmer told me that he was driving through Moralpes, and his Haitian friends were teasing him. saying he didn't dare stop and talk to the American soldiers about the murder case. And then the truck got the flat tire outside of the army compound, and he to his friends, "Ah, you have to listen to the messages from angels." I got Farmer to tell me a little about his life. He was 35. He had graduated from Harvard Medical School and also had a PhD in anthropology from Harvard. He worked in Boston for 4 months of the year, living in a church refectory in a poor neighborhood. The rest of the year, he worked without pay in Haiti, mainly doctoring peasants who had lost their land to a hydroelectric dam. He had been expelled from Haiti during the time of the junta and had sneaked back to his hospital. After the payment, he said, or an insultingly small bribe. After the payment, he said, of an insultingly small bribe. I looked up at him after the plane landed. We talked some more in a coffee shop, and I nearly missed my connecting flight. A few weeks later, I took him to dinner in Boston, hoping he could help make this sense. A few weeks later, I took him to dinner in Boston, hoping he could help make sense of what I was trying to write about it in Haiti, which he seemed glad to do. He clarified some of the history for me, and he left me wondering about it. He had described himself as a poor people's doctor, but he didn't quite fit my preconception of such a person. He clearly liked the fancy restaurant, the heavy cloth napkins, the good bottle of wine. What struck me that evening was how happy he seemed with his life. Obviously, a young man with disadvantages could have been doing good works as a doctor while commuting between Boston and this pleasant suburb. Not between a room in which I imagined must be a grubby church rectory and a wasteland in central Haiti. The way he talked, it seemed he actually enjoyed living among Haitian peasant farmers. At one point, speaking about medicine, he said, I don't know what everybody isn't excited by it." He smiled at me, and his face turned bright. Not red, so much as glowing, a luminescent smile. It affected me quite strongly, like a welcome gladly given, one you didn't have to earn. But after our dinner, I drifted out of touch with him, mainly, I now think, because he also disturbed me. Writing my article about Haiti, I came to share the pessimism of the soldiers I'd stayed with. I think we should have left Haiti to itself, one of Captain Carroll's men had said to me. Does it really matter who's in power? They're still gonna have to have the rich and the poor, and no one in between. I don't know what we hope to accomplish. We're still going to have a shipload of Haitians in boats wanting to go to America. But I guess it's best not to even try to figure it out. The soldiers had come to Haiti and lifted a terror and restored a government. And then I left the country. The soldiers had come to Haiti and lifted a terror and restored a government. And then they left. The country was about as poor and broken down as when they'd arrived. They'd have done their best, I thought. They were worldly and tough. They wouldn't cry about the things beyond their control. I felt as though, in Farmer, I'd been offered another way of thinking about the place. I felt as though, in Farmer, I'd been offered another way of thinking about a place like Haiti. But his way would be hard to share, because it implied such an extreme definition of the term doing one's best. The world is full of miserable places. One way of living comfortably is not to think about them, or when you do, to send money. Over the next 5 years, I mailed some sums to the charity that supported a farmer's hospital in Haiti. He sent back handwritten thank you notes on each occasion. Once, from a friend of a friend, I heard he was doing something notable in international health. Something to do with tuberculosis. I didn't look into the details, though, and I didn't see him again until the near end of 1999. I was the one who made the appointment. He named the place. That was the first chapter of Mountains Beyond Mountains by Tracy. I hope you enjoyed, and remember, the rest of the book is available to check out at your leisure.